I was blowing out a single candle on a grocery store cupcake, alone, in my apartment, on my 31st birthday, when my phone lit up. I thought, finally, someone remembered. I picked it up so fast, I almost knocked the cupcake off the counter. It was a spam email about car insurance. I put the phone down, took a breath, and ate the cupcake standing up at my kitchen counter in the dark. Happy birthday to me. My name is Claire Hendricks. I'm 31. I'm a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio, and I have a family of 5 people who have not acknowledged my birthday in 10 years. Not a text. Not a voicemail. Not even a thumbs-up reaction on a Facebook post. 10 years. I stopped telling people that because the look they give you, that slow, pitying blink, starts to feel worse than the silence itself. So I just stopped saying it out loud. I kept it inside and learned how to be okay with it. But I need you to stay with me because this story is not about me being sad. This story is about what happened 3 days after that cupcake moment and what I did when it did. If you're new here, subscribe before we get into this, because I promise you, by the end of this, your mouth will be open. Mine was many. So, my family. Gerald and Patricia Hendricks. My parents. Married 38 years, still living in the same beige house in Akron where I grew up. My dad is a retired electrician who spends most of his time in the garage. My mom is the kind of woman who makes 3 casseroles for a neighbor's surgery, but forgets her middle daughter exists for a decade. Then there's Derek, my older brother, 36, the golden one, the one who never left Akron, who coaches youth football and gets called a community pillar in the local paper. And Amber, my younger sister, 27, who is currently living in my parents' basement temporarily, which has been going on for about 2 years now. And then there's me. Claire. The one who left. The one who built something on her own, in a city where nobody handed her anything. The one who stopped waiting by the phone every March 14th, somewhere around year 4, and started buying herself grocery store cupcakes instead. I want to be very clear about something before I go further. I didn't hate my family. I didn't have some dramatic falling out with them. There was no big screaming fight, no door slamming, no ultimatum. That's the part that used to wreck me the most, honestly. If there had been a fight, a real one, at least I'd have a reason. At least I could point to something and say, see, that's why. But there was nothing. They just sort of forgot about me. Slowly. Quietly. Like forgetting where you put your keys, except the keys were a person. The first year I chalked it up to busy schedules. The second year I called my mom on my own birthday. Called her, and she talked for 40 minutes about Derek's new truck and Amber's boyfriend drama, and then said she had to start dinner. No mention of the date. I hung up and sat on my bathroom floor for a while. The third year I tested it. I didn't reach out. I waited. Nothing. Year 4, nothing. Year 5, I told my friend Sujin, and she looked at me exactly the way I described, that slow blink, and said, Claire, that's not normal. And I said, I know. And then I went home and didn't talk about it again for 2 years. By year 10, I had built up enough scar tissue over it that it only hurt in a dull, background kind of way. Like a bruise you forget about until someone presses it. That Tuesday, 3 days after the cupcake birthday, I was on my lunch break. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage, eating a sad desk salad, scrolling through my lottery app. I play occasionally, scratch tickets, the occasional Powerball, mostly just for the 2 seconds of possibility it gives me before reality kicks back in. I had bought a ticket the week before and never checked it. I scanned it. The app froze. I thought my phone glitched. I closed the app, reopened it, scanned again. A sound came out of me that I have never made before or since. Something between a laugh and a scream, and a word that I will not say on this channel. The ticket was valid. The amount was real. $1 million. $1 million. I sat in that parking garage for 22 minutes without moving. I called Sujin. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then she said, Claire, do not tell your family yet. And something about the way she said it, The urgency in her voice, the fact that she went there immediately before I even mentioned them, made my stomach do something strange. Because here's the thing, I hadn't even thought about my family yet. And somehow, Soojin had. I should have paid more attention to that moment. I should have asked her what she meant, asked her why that was her first instinct. But I was in shock. And I laughed it off, and I said, obviously, and then I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting at my desk trying to look normal, while my entire life had just tilted on its axis. I told no one else. I went home, I researched, I found out I needed to contact the lottery commission, verify the ticket, decide whether to take the lump sum or the annuity. The lump sum after taxes would be somewhere around $680,000. Still life-changing. Still the kind of number that makes your hands shake when you type it. That night, I made a list. Not of things to buy. Not yet. A list of people in my life and how I thought they would react. Soojin, my coworker Deb, my neighbor Marcus. And then, almost like a reflex, I wrote my family's names down. Mom. Dad. Derek. Amber. I stared at their names for a long time. Then I went to bed. The call to verify the ticket took 3 business days. During those 3 days, I told exactly 0 additional people. I went to work. I ate lunch. I watered my plant. I acted completely normal. And on the morning of the 3rd day, I got the confirmation email. It was real. It was mine. The process was starting. That same afternoon, I got a text from a number I hadn't heard from in over a year. It was my cousin Brenda. She said, "Hey stranger, was just thinking about you. Hope you're doing amazing, girl. We should catch up soon." 3 exclamation points. From a woman who had not texted me since my grandmother's funeral. I put my phone down very slowly. And for the first time since I found out I won, something cold moved through me. Not excitement, not joy. Something else entirely. A small, quiet alarm going off somewhere deep in my chest. I didn't know how Brenda could know. I hadn't told anyone. The lottery commission had confirmed the ticket was still in verification. My name wasn't public yet. It was probably nothing. It was probably a coincidence. But I had spent 10 years being the woman nobody remembered existed. And suddenly, people were remembering. The texts started slow at first. That's the thing nobody tells you. It doesn't come all at once like a wave. It comes in like water under a door. Quiet, almost unnoticeable, until suddenly you realize the floor is wet and you never heard a thing. Brenda on Tuesday, then on Wednesday morning, my Aunt Linda, my mom's older sister, a woman who once forgot to invite me to a family reunion because, quote, the list just got away from her, sent me a Facebook friend request and a message that said, "Thinking of you, sweet girl." On Wednesday afternoon, I got an Instagram follow request from Derek's wife, Melissa. Melissa and I had spoken maybe 6 times in 4 years. Her most recent communication to me before this had been on a photo I posted of my apartment's new bookshelf. I accepted nothing. I responded to nothing. I sat with it. I need to explain something about how my brain works because it's relevant. I'm a paralegal. I spend my days reading between the lines of documents, finding the detail that doesn't match, noticing the clause that feels slightly off. It's not a skill I turned on when I started the job. It's something I've always had, this noticing thing. And right now, every noticing instinct I had was running at full volume. Here is what I knew. My lottery win was in verification. My name was not yet public record. The official announcement, if I chose to allow one, would come later. So how were these people who had ignored me for years, suddenly orbiting me within 72 hours of my win? There are only a few answers to that question. Either it was coincidence, all of them, all at once, just happened to think of me, or someone new. Someone in my life who I had told. But I hadn't told anyone except Soojin. And Soojin would never. And this is the one that sat in my stomach like a stone. The Lottery Commission's records weren't as private as I thought, and someone had looked. I didn't let myself spiral, I just watched. Thursday. My birthday had been 12 days ago. 12 days of silence from every single member of my immediate family. And on Thursday evening, while I was heating up leftovers, my phone rang. My mom's name appeared on the screen. Patricia Hendricks. Calling me. On a random Thursday. I stood there and watched it ring. I let it go to voicemail. She left 58 seconds. I played it 3 times. Her voice was warm, warmer than I'd heard it in years, and she said she'd just been thinking about me, said she felt bad they hadn't connected in a while, said she was making my grandmother's pot roast recipe, and it made her think of me because I was always the one who loved it most. She laughed a little, said she hoped I was doing well, said to call her back when I could. Not one word about my birthday, not one word about the 12 days of silence, just warmth, just pot roast, just suddenly caring. I saved the voicemail. I don't know why. Instinct, I guess. I just pressed save and put my phone face down on the counter. Sujin came over that night. I showed her everything. The texts, the follow request, the voicemail. She went quiet in a way that told me she was trying to figure out how to say something carefully. Finally, she said, "Claire, I think someone talked." I said, "Who?" "I only told you." And she looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read and said, "I know, but I might have told my sister." I blinked. She put her hands up immediately. She said it was an accident. She was on the phone with her sister Yuna, and she was so excited and it slipped out before she could stop herself. And Yuna didn't know my family, there was no connection, it was fine. And I believed her. I did. I believe her still. Sujin is not a malicious person. But here's what I also know. Yuna is extremely active on social media. And while Yuna doesn't know my family, social media doesn't care about that. Information doesn't need a direct line. It needs one open window. I'm not angry at Sujin. I want to be clear about that. But that night, after she left, I sat on my couch and thought about what it meant that my family, people who had not acknowledged my existence on my birthday for a decade, had somehow found their way back to me within days of $1 million win. And the more I sat with it, the more something else started surfacing. Something older. I started thinking about the years. Not just the birthdays, the phone calls I made that went unreturned, the holidays I drove to Akron for and felt invisible at. The time I had a minor surgery and texted my mom to let her know, and she responded 3 days later with, "Oh, no hope, okay." The time Derek actually called me, which almost never happened, and I got so excited, and he spent the whole call asking if I knew a good immigration attorney because his friend needed one, using me for my professional knowledge. Then gone again. I thought about all of it, laid out in a row, like evidence, and then I thought about what they were going to say when they showed up. Because I already knew they were going to show up. The voicemail was just the beginning. I was right. Friday morning, I woke up to a text from Derek. First text in 8 months. It said, "Hey sis, heard you've been doing really well. Proud of you. Let's grab food sometime. Sis." He called me sis. Like we were close. Like we spoke. Like he hadn't let 8 months pass without a single word. I screenshot it. I didn't respond. By Friday afternoon, I had heard from my mom twice more. A text this time, with a heart emoji, and gotten a voicemail from my dad, which was so unprecedented that I actually had to sit down. My dad, Gerald Hendricks, had called me voluntarily exactly twice in the past 5 years. Once when my grandmother died. And now. His voicemail lasted 34 seconds. He said he was proud of me. He said he heard I was doing well. He said Mom wanted to come visit soon, and he thought that would be real nice. He didn't say what he heard. He didn't say how. He just assumed I would know. And fill in the blanks. And be happy they called. I played it back twice. Then I opened a notes app on my phone and started writing everything down. Dates, times, exact wording. Every message. Every voicemail. Every follow request. I don't know what made me do that. Maybe 10 years of being overlooked had taught me to document things that might matter later. Maybe the paralegal in me kicked in. Maybe some part of me already knew that whatever was coming was going to require receipts. I labeled the note, family, and then I waited to see what they would do next. Saturday morning, my mother showed up at my door. I don't mean she called to say she was coming. I don't mean she texted from the highway. I mean, I heard a knock at 10:14 a.m., opened my door still holding my coffee mug, and there was Patricia Hendricks standing on my doorstep with a fruit basket wrapped in cellophane, and a smile so wide it looked like it had been practiced. "Surprise!" she said. I stood there for what felt like a full minute. She drove 2.5 hours, from Akron to Columbus, on a Saturday morning, without calling, to surprise me, with a fruit basket. She had not been to my apartment in 3 years. The last time she visited, she stayed 4 hours, spent most of it on the phone with Amber about some problem with Amber's landlord, and left without seeing the new bookshelf I had specifically mentioned wanting to show her. Now she was here, smiling, holding oranges and a pineapple in cellophane. I stepped aside and let her in, because what else do you do? She walked in commenting on everything. "Oh, this is so cozy. Oh, I love what you've done with the curtains. Oh, is that a new plant?" The way people talk when they're nervous and covering it with enthusiasm. I watched her. I said, in the right places. I made her coffee. She sat at my kitchen table, and she talked for 20 minutes before I said a single real sentence. She talked about the drive, about the weather, about a show she was watching, about Amber's new job prospect, about Derek's oldest kid losing a tooth. I sat across from her, and I nodded, and I drank my coffee, and I watched her eyes. Here's what I noticed. She never once asked me how I was doing. Not once. She talked at me, around me, near me, but she did not ask me one direct question about my life until we had been sitting there for 24 minutes. I clocked it, and then she leaned forward, folded her hands on my table, and said, "So, word is, you've had some exciting news lately." There it was. I kept my face completely still. I'm good at that. Paralegal training. Honestly, you learn to keep your expression neutral when someone says something on the stand that surprises you. I said, "What kind of exciting news?" She laughed a little, waved her hand, said, "Oh, just Brenda mentioned something through the grapevine." She smiled again. "We're just so happy for you, Claire Bear." Claire Bear. She hadn't called me that since I was 9. I said, "Happy for me about what, Mom?" Calm, quiet, genuinely curious how far she was willing to take this. She blinked. "A little less comfortable now." She said, "Well, your news, honey." And when I kept looking at her without filling in the blank, she said softer, "The lottery, sweetheart." I nodded slowly. I said, "Who told Brenda?" She got flustered. Said she didn't know, just heard it around, didn't want to pry. Said she just wanted to come see her daughter. Said it had been too long. And there was a moment, a real one, not performed, where she looked at me across that table and her eyes went a little soft. And I thought maybe there was something genuine in there underneath the cellophane and the fruit basket. Maybe she actually felt something. Maybe this visit wasn't entirely calculated. But then she said, "We were thinking, your father and I, that maybe you'd want to think about family, now that things are looking up for you. Maybe help Derek out a little. He's been struggling with the business. And Amber, she's been having such a hard time." And just like that, the soft moment was gone. I put my mug down on the table. I looked at my mother. And I thought about 10 birthdays. 10 March 14th. The spam email and the grocery store cupcake. The voicemail about pot roast. The 34-second call from my dad. Derek's text, calling me sis, after 8 months of silence. I said, "Mom, when is my birthday?" She opened her mouth, closed it, and I watched in real time as she searched for the answer on her face, the way you search for a word you should know but don't. "March." She said it slowly. "March." She glanced at the fruit basket like it might help her. 14th, I said quietly. "It's March 14th. She said, "Of course, honey, I know that." I said, "You didn't call." She said, "What?" I said, "This year. You didn't call, or text, or anything." Her face shifted. A complicated series of expressions crossed it. Guilt, defensiveness, the beginning of an excuse. She said, "Claire, it's been such a busy season." I said, "It's been 10 years, Mom." Silence. I said it again, not louder, just clearer. 10 years. Not last year, Not this year. 10. And I watched her sit with that number, watched it land on her, the way numbers land, when you finally have to look at them directly. She started to cry, and here's where it got complicated for me. Because I am not a cruel person. I did not want to make my mother cry at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning. There was a part of me, a younger part, the part that used to wait by the phone, that wanted to reach across the table and say it's okay. That part of me is still there. It didn't go away, but another part of me had spent 10 years learning to survive the quiet, and that part needed her to sit in it for a minute. I got up, got her a glass of water, and set it in front of her without saying anything. Then I went to the window and stood there looking out at the street while she got herself together. She said, "I'm so sorry, Claire." I said, "I know." She said, "I don't have a good excuse. I know that." I said, "I know that too." And then she said the thing that changed everything. The thing that cracked the whole situation open in a direction I wasn't expecting. She said, "Your father, he was the one who used to remind us. He had it in his calendar. Every year he would say, 'Don't forget Claire's birthday.' And then, 3 years after you moved out, he just stopped. And I don't know why I didn't notice he'd stopped. I just didn't." I turned around and looked at her. She said, "I think he was angry at you for leaving." I stood there, very still. She said, "Not right. I know it's not right. But Gerald has always been the kind of man who punishes silence with more silence. And I followed his lead. I always follow his lead. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, fully. But it was the first honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in 10 years. And it landed somewhere deep. I sat back down across from her. We talked for 2 more hours. Here's what nobody tells you about getting a large sum of money. It doesn't make you feel powerful. Not at first. First, it makes you feel exposed. Like you've been walking around with a wound nobody could see. And suddenly, someone turned a bright light on it, and now everyone in the room is looking. My mom left that Saturday with a hug that lasted longer than any hug we'd shared in years. She smelled like the same perfume she'd worn my whole childhood. And for a second, just a second, I was 7 years old, and nothing was complicated yet. Then she got in her car and drove back to Akron. And I stood in my empty apartment and felt more confused than I had since the whole thing started. Because the thing is, she had apologized. A real one. Not a defensive one. She told me the truth about my father. A truth that was uncomfortable, that didn't make her look good by association, and she told it anyway. That's not nothing. That actually meant something to me. But my phone was also currently holding 8 unread messages from family members who had not spoken to me in months. In that same week, I had a meeting scheduled with a financial advisor, and another with the Lottery Commission's payment processing team, and a third with a lawyer I'd hired to help me manage the transition. And all of that was happening while my family was suddenly, aggressively remembering I existed. I had to make some decisions. Strategic ones. I called Sujin. She came over with wine. She always brings wine, and I laid out everything on the coffee table. Not literally, but I talked through all of it. The texts. The voicemails. My mom's visit. The things she said about my dad. Sujin listened without interrupting, which is something she's extraordinarily good at. When I was done, she said, "So what do you want to happen?" That's the question, isn't it? Not what do they deserve? Not what's fair. What do I want? I sat with it. I said, "I want my dad to look me in the eye and tell me himself." She nodded. I said, "And I want to figure out which of these people actually want me and which ones want my money before I make any decisions about either." She nodded again. Then she said, "How are you going to do that?" I thought about it for a while. And then I did something that felt a little calculated, but also, honestly, felt like self-preservation. I made a plan. I called my dad first. Not my mom. My dad. I called Gerald Hendricks on a Sunday morning, and he picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting. His voice was careful. Warm in the way of someone performing warmth. He said, "Claire, so glad you called." I said, "Hi, Dad." And then I just waited. He talked for a few minutes about nothing. Weather, football, some issue with the gutters on the house. I let him. I was listening for something underneath it. And then he said, "So I guess you've been having quite a week." and there was something almost proprietary in his voice. Almost like he was saying, "Good for our family." Like my win was something that belonged to all of them by proximity. I said, "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Pause. He said, "Okay." I said, "Did you used to have my birthday in your calendar? And did you take it out?" The silence that followed was about 4 seconds long. In silence measurement terms, that's enormous. He said, "Your mother told you that." I said, "Is it true?" Another pause. Then, "Claire, and he stopped. Started again. "When you left, I took it hard. You were always the one I thought would stay. Derek, I knew would stay. Amber was young. But I thought you and I had something. And you just left. Didn't look back." I said, "I was 21, Dad. I went to college." He said, "I know that." I said, "You punished me for 10 years because I went to college?" He said, "It wasn't punishment. It was..." He stopped. Started again. I don't know what it was. Looking at it now, I don't know what I was thinking. I think I was hurt, and I didn't know how to say it, and so I just went quiet. And your mother followed my lead. And then it became the way things were. I was sitting on my bedroom floor by this point. I don't remember moving there. I was just on the floor, back against the bed, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my 63-year-old father admit that he had frozen me out for a decade because he was hurt and didn't have the words for it. I said, "That's not an excuse, Dad." He said, "No, it's not." I said, "I ate birthday cake alone for 10 years. He didn't say anything. But I heard him breathe, heard something shift in his breathing. I said, "I need you to understand that before we talk about anything else. Before my money or what happens next or any of that, I need you to just understand that." He said, "I understand it." I said, "Do you?" He said quietly, "I'm sorry, Claire. I'm genuinely sorry." I got off the phone 20 minutes later and sat on my floor for a while. Then I sent Derek and Amber each a text. Same message, word for word. "Hey, I'd like to get together and talk soon. Not about money, just talk. Let me know when works." I kept it neutral. I kept it open. I wanted to see how they would respond to an invitation that didn't dangle anything. Derek responded in 4 minutes. "Absolutely. Anytime you want, sis. I'm here for you." Fast. Eager. Too eager. Amber responded 4 hours later. "Okay. Sure. You okay?" 2 words shorter. Less polished. But something about the "you okay" struck me differently than Derek's response. It was small, and maybe I was reading into it, but it felt like she was actually asking. I started to wonder if they were all the same, or if I had been grouping them together when maybe they weren't. I met with my lawyer that week. His name is Paul. He's in his 50s, and he has the calm, unhurried energy of someone who has seen every version of this situation before. When I explained the family dynamic, he didn't blink. He just nodded and said, "You'd be surprised how common this is. The number changes, but the pattern doesn't." He helped me think through what protections I wanted, what I was and wasn't obligated to share, how to navigate conversations about money without making promises in a moment of emotion. He said something that stayed with me. He said, "The money is a test, not one you chose. But it is one, and the results are going to be very clear." I thought about that a lot. The Saturday after the conversation with my dad, I drove to Akron. I hadn't planned to. It just happened. The way some decisions happen, like your body makes the choice before your brain does. I pulled up in front of the beige house and sat in the car for a while. The garage light was on. My dad was in there, which is where he always was. I went in through the side door. He was at his workbench, doing something with a hinge. He looked up when I came in, and the expression on his face, I wasn't prepared for it. He looked relieved, like he'd been holding his breath for a week. He said, "Claire." I said, "Hi, Dad." We stood there for a second in the garage smell, oil and wood dust and something metallic, and then he put down the hinge and crossed the garage and hugged me. Not a careful hug, a real one. I let myself be hugged. I let myself be 7 years old in the garage for just 1 minute, and then I stepped back. Because I had things to say, and I had not driven 2.5 hours to leave them unsaid. I want to be careful about how I tell this last part, because I know what the satisfying version of this story would look like. I know what most people want. The confrontation, The power move. The moment where the daughter with the $1 million looks her family in the eye and walks away forever while dramatic music plays. That's not what happened. And honestly, that's not who I am. But what did happen was real. And it changed things permanently. Not in a destruction way, in a clarity way. And sometimes clarity is the most powerful thing you can walk away with. The full family gathering happened on a Sunday, 2 weeks after my mom showed up with the fruit basket. It was not my idea. My mom organized it, called it a family dinner, made the pot roast she'd mentioned in the voicemail. I drove up knowing exactly what it was. A gathering organized around me for the first time in a decade, for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with hope. Hope that I would be generous. Hope that the money would flow toward them. I walked in, and the house smelled like the pot roast. Amber was at the kitchen table on her phone. Derek and Melissa were on the couch. My parents were in the kitchen. Everyone looked up when I walked in, and the energy had that strange, charged quality of people trying very hard to seem casual. Dinner was good, actually. The pot roast was good. The conversation was careful. Everyone was careful, and I let it be what it was for a while. I asked about Derek's kids. I asked Amber about the job prospect. I listened. I noticed. And then, after dessert, when everyone was still at the table, Derek leaned back in his chair and said, with a smile, "So Claire, big winner. You figure out what you're going to do with it yet?" And the table went a little quiet. Because that was the question. That was the whole reason we were here, laid bare, right on top of the pot roast plates. I looked at him. I said, "I have some ideas." He smiled. "We'd love to hear them." I said, "I'd like to talk about something first." I had thought about this moment. I had rehearsed it in the car on the way up. Not a speech. I didn't want a speech. Just a truth. Clear and quiet. I said, "I want to ask everyone something, and I'd like an honest answer. Not the right answer, just honest." I looked around the table. My mom, my dad, who met my eyes, Derek, Melissa, Amber, who was watching me carefully. I said, "Do you all know when my birthday is?" Melissa shifted in her seat. Derek looked at the table for half a second. My mom said March 14th, quickly, like she'd been ready for this. My dad said it with her. Amber said it a beat later, quieter. I looked at Derek. He said at last, "March 14th. I said, "When's the last time any of you said that to me on March 14th? The table went quiet the way a room goes quiet, when the truth is just sitting there in the middle of the table and nobody wants to be the first to touch it. Amber said, softly, "I didn't. I know I didn't. I don't have an excuse." I looked at her. I believed her. Derek started to say something about busy seasons, and I held up one hand. Not rudely, just firmly. And he stopped. I said, "I'm not doing this to punish anyone, I promise. I'm doing it because, if anything is going to be different going forward, if this family is going to be something real for me, not just when my circumstances change, then we have to be honest about what the last 10 years actually were. All of us." My dad cleared his throat. He said it was wrong, what we did, what I did. It started with me. He didn't look away from me when he said it. I made it the way it was. And I'm sorry. The table was very quiet. My mom was crying again. Amber was looking at her hands. Derek was doing the thing men like Derek do when they're uncomfortable, which is staring at a fixed point and waiting for the emotional temperature to lower. I said, "I'm not cutting anyone off. I'm not making dramatic decisions. But I need you to know that the money doesn't change what the years were. I'm not going to use it to pretend we were close when we weren't. If we're going to be close, we have to build that from here. From honesty, not from a lottery ticket." I looked at Derek specifically. He looked back at me. I said, "I'm not funding Derek's business." He opened his mouth. I said, "Not because I don't want to help you, but because we are strangers who happen to share parents. And you don't build a relationship by leading with a funding request. That's not how it works." Melissa looked at Derek. He closed his mouth. I said, "I'm also not going to give anyone money right now. Not because I'm stingy. Because I'd like to see what happens between us when money isn't on the table. I'd like to find out who shows up for my birthday next March, when there's nothing to gain from it. My mom let out a small sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. Amber said, "I'll show up." Just like that. Simple. Direct. I looked at her, I said, "I know you will." And I meant it. The dinner ended without fanfare. People hugged me on the way out. Derek was quieter than usual. Melissa was polite. My dad held on to my hand for a moment at the door and didn't say anything. And somehow that said more than anything else. I drove back to Columbus that night with the window cracked, cold March air coming in, and something lighter in my chest than I'd carried in a very long time. Not happiness exactly. Not resolution. Something more like truth. I had told the truth. They had heard it. What they did with it was going to be up to them. March 14th came the following year. I was in my apartment, same kitchen, same good window. My phone buzzed at 8:02 a.m. It was Amber. "Happy birthday, sis. Love you." At 8:47, my mom called. We talked for 40 minutes. She did not bring up Amber's landlord once. My dad sent a text at noon. It said, "Happy birthday, Claire. Proud of you." 6 words. From Gerald Hendricks. Voluntary. Derek didn't call. But here's the thing about Derek not calling. I wasn't surprised. And I wasn't destroyed. Because I had stopped measuring my worth by whether Derek remembered me. That shift, that quiet internal shift, was worth more than any amount in a lottery ticket. The money bought me security. The truth bought me something better. I put my phone down on the counter and I cut myself a real birthday cake this time. Not a grocery store cupcake. An actual cake. Chocolate with vanilla frosting. From the bakery 2 blocks away. Sujin came over. We put on a movie. We ate too much cake. And at some point during the movie, I realized I was happy. Not because everything was perfect. Not because my family had transformed overnight into something out of a Hallmark special. But because I finally knew who I was dealing with. I knew which relationships had roots, and which ones had been held together by hope and proximity. I knew who would show up for me. Not the version of me with a lottery win, but just me. Claire Hendricks, 31, paralegal, with a good kitchen window and a plant she remembered to water. That's worth something. That's worth a lot, actually. If this story hit something in you, if you've ever been the person nobody remembered until you had something they wanted, drop a comment and tell me. I'd really love to know I'm not the only one. Like this video if it meant something to you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because we have more stories coming and I don't think you want to miss them. Take care of yourself. And water your plants.